I am Ian Dille.
And I'm Michael Sheehan. Today we got a bunch of bike racing news for you. We are going to recap some of the races that we just saw on FloBikes, including the Baloise Belgium Tour and the OVO Women's Tour. We're going to give you a midweek Tour de Suisse update, and we are going to dive into the races that we have coming up, including Route d'Occitan, Tour Slovenia, and one of the wackiest, wildest gravel races in professional cycling.
Yeah, Doors Hagelin. It is a can't-miss race. Let's get into it with the Baloise Belgium Tour. This was the coming of age for one of the big prodigies in the sport, Remco Evenepoel.
Yeah, we have been seeing Remco Evenepoel since he burst onto the scene at the World Championships last year in Innsbruck, where he had a crash in the junior road race. He completely chased solo, just rode through the field, and then went on to win the race solo. It was one of the most dominating performances we have seen in the sport. He is, of course, a huge, huge talent. He was a junior soccer star in Belgium until he took up the bike 2 years ago, and, well, he hasn't slowed down since. He is an absolute prodigy, and we saw him really kind of come of age at the Belgium Tour.
Yeah, and he had a strong start to this year. I think we were all wondering how he was going to perform in the World Tour. Coming from the junior ranks to the World Tour, he did impress at the Vuelta a San Juan earlier this year, scored a top 15 in his first World Tour race, the UAE Tour, and put on just a show of force at the Hammer Series in Limburg on the hill climb, soloing for almost 40 kilometers. But this race, 1-point HC race across Belgium against some of the top World Tour teams, World Tour stars, 5 days. I'm going to get into the big GC days, which were stages 2, 3, and 4. Stage 2, I mean, it was just a phenomenal display of bike racing from Remco Evenepoel. This was a race that was held on the fields of Flanders. It went over the Muur van Geraardsbergen, and it did include some nasty cobblestone sections, including one set of cobblestones covered with grass with rain pouring down on them. Evenepoel really forced the selection in this race 40 kilometers in, and he was too strong for the group. He was even riding in, he was riding away from them, ended up getting in a fight with his teammate Peter Siri at one point about going away too early. When he came back to the group, even some of his competitors were encouraging him to save his matches. And at 15 kilometers to go, he launched the attack that would be the nail in the coffin for the group. Basically just rode away from a select group of favorites. Victor Kampenaerts was the only rider who was able to hold his wheel. Victor Kampenaerts was in the box so bad he was not even able to take a pull and ended up crashing in a tight corner. And this was the GC lead that Remco would end up defending throughout the race. He finished 45 seconds ahead of the chasing field. In the time trial the following day, he finished fourth, only losing, I think it was 3 seconds to Tim Wellens in a 10-kilometer time trial. This TT was actually held in his hometown. And then stage 4 was, I think, the real show of dominance. Not only his bike handling, his strength, but also just his composure as being a stage race leader, which is what he wants to do. I mean, he's made it clear that he wants to win the Tour de France one day. Again, he's only 19 years old. Tim Wellens went all out with an attack 17 kilometers to go up the final climb. Remco set out chasing him, basically rode everybody off his wheel, ended up catching Victor Kampenaerts, who was in the early break. Kampenaerts, Wellens, and Remco came together over the top of the climb, and it was Kampenaerts who tried to counterattack Remco over the top of the hill, only succeeded in dropping his own teammate, Tim Wellens, when Remco saw they had a gap. He ended up time trialing to the finish with Kampenaerts on his wheel. Poor Tim Wellens was stuck in no man's land, really getting beat up on by a 19-year-old. Remco ended up leading out the sprint. Kampenaerts did come around him at the end, but only narrowly. And, I mean, for this young rider to win a professional race at this level really shows he has what it takes. I think, like I said, we were all wondering how he was going to perform in the World Tour. He's performing incredibly.
This was absolutely incredible from Remco. Not only was he the strongest guy in the race, which is saying so much. He's only 19 years old, and to see just a ride like that, it's pretty mind-blowing, but also having, like you said, the composure, the mental game, to be on Deceuninck Quick-Step, one of the best teams in the world, have a leadership position after only 2 years of being in the sport and be able to shoulder that and perform, it just shows what a phenomenal sportsman and what an incredible talent Remco is. The future of cycling is looking incredibly bright. We have, of course, been talking about Mathieu van der Poel an absolute ton this year because he does, for all intents and purposes, look to be really the shining future of the sport. He is just come from cyclocross. He's absolutely phenomenal, but we have a lot of people have really neglected to mention Remco Evenepoel. He is, of course, a few years younger than Van der Poel and Wout van Aert, but I think that the three of these guys are going to be some of the primary antagonists in the sport of cycling for years to come.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the tweet from Thomas Gent requesting that the UCI ban these three riders, Evenepoel, Van Aert, and Van der Poel, from the sport for the next 4 years until the next generation of riders has fully aged out, so they don't actually have to race against these guys. Of course, that was just tongue-in-cheek. I think even the older riders in the sport are looking forward to competing against this and the level that these new riders are going to bring all of professional cycling to. And as a cycling fan, it's to our benefit. Another race that is to our benefit and is really improving is the Oval Women's Tour. We saw a phenomenal battle at what is, basically the premier women's world tour stage race on the calendar.
Yeah, and it was Lizzie Deignan who has come back. She took some time away from the sport. This is her first year back. She is on the Trek Segafredo racing team. The team was really built around her, and we are now seeing why. She had a really fantastic battle with Cassia Niewiadoma throughout the entire week, and she did manage to come out and win the race overall.
Yeah, this was a race last year that was won by American Corinne Rivera, which was a really exciting win. But, when a sprinter wins a stage race, it does speak to the fact, and, I'll correct myself, Corinne Rivera is not just a sprinter, and she had an incredible race last year, but there was some criticism that this race was not as hard as it could have been. The organizers came back with the most challenging route we have seen at the OVO Women's Tour. The race's first uphill finish and some of the hardest stages over the low-lying mountains of Wales. And Lizzie Deignan really took this race by the horns from the start. Stage 2 on a circuit, she went out head-to-head against Marianne Vos in a sprint, finished second there and moved into the GC battle. In stage 3 was third behind, and a phenomenal win by Cassia Niewiadoma on the uphill finish. And then it was really stage 5 where Deignan stamped her authority on this race, attacked on the final climb of the day, drew out her teammate Elisa Longo-Borghini and Cassia Niewiadoma. These three riders rode as a group to the finish with Borghini riding in the services of Deignan, who is the stronger sprinter, ended up leading out the sprint for Deignan, who, go back and look at this sprint. She does a phenomenal job of positioning, taking Niewiadoma's wheel coming into the sprint and winning convincingly to take the leader's jersey, and then held on to it through the final day. This is actually her second win in the OVO Women's Tour. She won previously in 2016, but I think to prove that Trek Segafredo made a good choice by signing her, by building this Trek Segafredo women's team around her while she was pregnant with her first child, coming back so soon after having her first child. She was posting pictures of her baby girl Orla throughout the race alongside her podium pictures. Just proves the support and belief that this team had in her.
Yeah, and this is definitely an emotional win for Lizzie Deignan. She has been through a journey in cycling. Not only did she become a mother, but she was feeling just burnout with the sport before taking some time off. So it is fantastic to see her back and firing on cylinders. Another person who is firing on all cylinders right now, seemingly, is Peter Sagan, the king of Switzerland.
Yeah, it is good to see Peter Sagan back and winning in Switzerland. Of course, he is the all-time most stage winner at the Tour of Switzerland. And his win in stage 3 was, just incredibly impressive, and I think we will be looking forward to a Peter Sagan on fine form at the Tour de France. Basically took John Degenkolb's lead-out man, Jasper Stuyven, from him with 200 meters to go and just owned this sprint.
Yeah, John Degenkolb did not much like that, but there was also not much that John Degenkolb could do about it. It was a sprint tailor-made for Peter Sagan, and he just Sagan'd it. Great to see him back to winning. He has had a less than remarkable spring by his accounts, and he is definitely going to be hoping for many stage wins to come at the Tour de France. Things are looking good for him. Another rider who things are looking up for is Elia Viviani, the Italian champion. Had a really bitterly disappointing Giro d'Italia. He thought he won the first sprint stage. He ended up getting relegated, and that just completely knocked him off his stride for the entire tour. He ended up abandoning the race without a win. He notched up a win on stage 4 of Tour de Suisse, and things are looking up for him.
Person that things are not looking up for is Geraint Thomas and Team Ineos. I mean, there seems to be a curse of being a GC leader on Team Ineos. First it was Egan Bernal breaking his collarbone prior to the Giro d'Italia, then Chris Froome with his horrific crash at the Dauphiné, and now Geraint Thomas abandons the Tour de Suisse after a very difficult fall on stage 4.
Ineos has got to be feeling the pressure right now coming up to the Tour de France. It sounds like Geraint Thomas did not break any bones, but they're certainly taking every precaution with the defending Tour de France champion, with Chris Froome completely hospitalized out of commission. They would definitely like to go into the Tour with Geraint Thomas and Egan Bernal as 2 cards to play for the GC, but right now Egan Bernal is feeling a little bit extra pressure on his shoulders because it may be down to him.
Yeah, I mean, it's going from a team that looked to have 3 potential winners on its roster to, maybe getting somebody on the podium would be a victory for them at this point in terms of how their GC riders are being depleted. But also, it's Ineos, so you never know what could happen. It could be Wout Poels' turn to win the Tour de France. We will certainly see. Let's get into, before we get into this interesting gravel race we have on FloBikes this weekend, let's get into some of the undercard Tour de France warm-up races, the Route de Aquitaine, as well as the Tour of Slovenia. These are interesting races to watch because you definitely see some of the undercard, maybe dark horse riders for the Tour de France putting these on their calendar so they don't necessarily have to go against the big favorites at the Dauphiné and the Tour de Suisse.
Yeah, first up is Tour of Slovenia. This begins on Wednesday, June 19th. It is a lumpy race around Slovenia. Defending champion Primož Roglič will not be in attendance. However, a couple interesting starts are going to be in the sprinting lineup. We have Pascal Ackermann coming off a phenomenal Giro d'Italia, as well as Mark Cavendish, who is coming off of a phenomenal nothing. Cavendish has really been struggling the past few years with crashes and illness. He is desperately chasing a record win at the Tour de France. He would really like to find some winning legs at this upcoming Tour of Slovenia.
Mark Cavendish, do not count him out if you're building your fantasy Tour de France cycling roster. He is a guy with incredible experience, with incredible will, and it'll be interesting to see what he can do at the Tour of Slovenia. I think if he's riding well there, we can definitely count a stage win or 2 from him at the Tour de France. Also interesting is seeing Alejandro Valverde at the Route de Aquitaine. He won this race last year and is coming back as the defending champion. Also, EF is sending Rigoberto Urán there. He actually did this race last year as well for his warm-up race.
Yeah, they are also going to have Joe Dombrowski on the EF roster, as well as Lachlan Morton, who is coming fresh off of Dirty Kanza. I think that Lachlan Morton is going to have some really good gravel racing legs at 200 miles in the legs. We'll see what that'll do to a World Tour rider at a World Tour race. I'm actually excited to see that. Let's get into our gravel race that we have on FloBikes. It's not actually a gravel race, but it is a mixed surface race, and it is just an absolute hoot. Dwars Het Hageland.
Yeah, this is a race that was won previously by Mathieu van der Poel, Nicky Terpstra, and Chris Nielens last year. Dirt tracks, farm roads, cobblestones. This race really has it all. It's the type of race where you tune in and you're like, I can't believe they're racing down that. And it's definitely interesting to see World Tour riders take on this type of terrain. Riders flat come from 5 minutes back. The race gets turned on its head. It really has everything.
And it is so fun to watch, and it looks like an absolute blast to race, honestly, if you're into that kind of thing. It is going to be a fantastic race. It is on Friday, June 21st on FloBikes. I would highly recommend tuning in to see that one.
Tune in, and we will see you next week for a recap of what we saw this weekend and a look ahead to what's coming up.
Thanks for joining.